Looks like they're trying to get this up. While we're waiting, I need some help. You should have received in your bulletin a little piece of paper, a couple pieces of paper that has a place to fill out the honor. It's a worksheet, if you will. If you would like a larger one, maybe large print, or perhaps you just want more room to write notes, we do have more copies up here. I need some help passing these out. And I also have clipboards. If you'd like to have a clipboard to fill this out, I could use some more help passing these out. Looks like we've got a volunteer or two. Come on up. I could use some more volunteers. And then also, if you need something to write with, I have pencils. I used to pass out pens, but one time I gave this out, and at the end of the sermon, some guy says, my pen ran out in the very beginning, and then he wanted to copy all my notes at the end. So, yeah, if you could pass those out for everyone, that would be awesome. Yeah. If you would like either a large print edition, raise your hand. And they also have some clipboards, and they also have some pencils. So while they're passing that out, I'm going to explain a little bit about what we're going to do today. So, as I said, my name is Glen. I'm what we call a pathfinder. If you don't know what pathfinders are, some people describe us, it's kind of like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts only combined. It's for boys and girls. And instead of earning badges, little circle badges on their scarves, they call them honors. So they get to learn things like, how to go camping, how to do business skills and those kinds of things. Only instead of calling them badges, we call them honors. And that's kind of true. All that stuff is true, but there's probably a bigger difference I want to talk about. We have an ulterior motive in Pathfinders. So Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts try to make our kids better citizens for this country. In Pathfinders, we try to make our kids better citizens for the kingdom. So that's our goal, to get all the kids to the kingdom, and we want to do our best. So we have a group of honors. So we do have things like camping skills and those kinds of things, but we also have a group of honors we call outreach ministries. In outreach ministries, there is an honor called Peacemaker honor. And so at the end of this, if you fill out your worksheet as we go along and show it to Miss Molly, I'm sure for a Pathfinder donation, she'd be more than happy to order a patch for you, and you can earn your very first Pathfinder honor. If you are a Pathfinder, you can add this to your scarf, so that's nice. All right, everybody has a worksheet. Everybody has something to write with and write on. We're all good? Write on. Okay. All right. So first of all, are there any teachers in this class? Are there any teachers here? Teacher. Okay. And your name again? Peggy? Penny. So Miss Penny, I want you to know that this is not school. Okay? You cannot flunk these people here. I am allowing them to copy off of my worksheet. Okay? We understand that? Don't flunk anybody. Okay. So the idea is that you can fill this worksheet out any way that you like, but I'm going to let you copy from what I wrote down. And I would suggest you do. I mean, I've had some people where they said, well, I'm not going to write this down, but by the end they were trying to write down. And by all means, you can come up afterwards and look at my worksheet and copy off of me. But I'm going to tell you what my answers are, and you can fill out your own answers if you desire, if you think you have a better answer. So it's okay to copy off of me, what the intent is. We're going to talk about conflict. So when I say conflict, I want you to yell out some things that come to mind. I'm going to yell. What does it mean when I say conflict?
War.
What?
War.
Disagreement. What else? Children fighting. What else? The great controversy, yeah. All those things are not really good, are they? It's really bad things. So I'm going to tell you that when most people think of conflict, they think of conflict like I do. We have the cheap dictionary, where a fight, battle, struggle, especially a prolonged struggle or strife. So we actually talk about the Vietnam conflict. It's not officially a war. Looked like a war, tasted like a war, smelled like a war. People got killed, but it was a conflict. That was technically a conflict because we didn't declare war. A controversy, quarrel, or conflicts between party. So you may hear about in a legal situation where people go to court because they have a conflict that they have to work out. Discord of action, feeling or affect antagonism, opposition or of interest, principles or conflict of ideas. So this is probably no more true than today. We have the politically left, we have the politically right. They're in conflict, right? Would we all agree that there's some big conflicts there? A striking together, a collision. We drove an hour and a half for close to 2 hours to come here this morning. We were on the road. Fortunately, we were not involved in any conflicts on the road. Praise the Lord for that. Incompatibility or interference as of an idea, desire, event or activity with another, a conflict in the schedule. So if you were to call me and told me that you want to meet with me Thursday at 2 o'clock, I might say, I'm sorry, I just looked at my calendar and I have a conflict at that time. Let's arrange another time. And then psychiatric, a mental struggle arising from opposing demands or impulses. I'm sure many of us know people that have internal demons, that have conflicts going inside their head. So these are what I call the cheap dictionary. So if you just a cheap dictionary, this is what you might find. But we're going to talk about the expensive dictionary definitions today. There's actually a bad conflict and a good conflict. We usually don't think about good conflicts. And we're going to learn today that you can actually take bad conflicts and turn them into good conflicts. And so we're going to try to figure out how to do that today. The bad conflict is what we call catabolic conflict. So I think that's the first question on your worksheet. Bad conflict is catabolic conflict. Catabolic conflict is the bad conflict. So if you're into a diet, so you may learn about how food breaks down in your body, the catabolic response to different kinds of food. That's what it's doing. It's breaking down the food, breaking this down. So that's bad conflict is where we tear each other apart. And the good conflict is the anabolic conflict. Anabolic, you've probably heard the term about anabolic steroids. I'm not saying that they're good, but we call them anabolic because they really build up the muscles. So anabolic is what we call good conflict, anabolic conflict. So these next few slides, I'm going to give a caution here. We're going to talk about politics, okay? And if you think we're up here talking about, you're supposed to feel good or bad the way you vote or how you think about politically, you're completely missing the point. I'm doing everything I can to try to make sure that I am completely apolitical when I discuss this. It's just that politically, we all know what's going on, and we understand some current events that we can talk about. So if you can't handle that like a real adult, please just lay down in the pew, and we'll get through these next few slides, and your neighbor can tap you when this is over, and we can go on. So does everybody understand? I'm not at all trying to say Republican or Democrat or anything like that, but this has some good examples for us to talk about. So do you guys recognize this? Been from a few years ago. Was this anabolic or catabolic conflict? Catabolic, without a doubt, catabolic conflict. This was actually a debate, one of the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump during Trump's first run at the office. And this was during the debate, and the moderator asked them a question. Can you say something nice about your opponent? And both of them really, really struggled with that question. And they weren't the only ones. I think most of Americans struggle with that question. In fact, this actually election was very historic, and I'll explain why. But traditionally, about 30% of the voters will vote for the Republican no matter who the candidate is. About 30% plus or minus will vote for the Democratic candidate no matter who the candidate is. And the rest of the people in the middle would look at that and say, okay, who do I like better? So when Obama was president, when he ran for president, pretty much everyone agreed, even the hardcore Democrats agreed John McCain was a pretty good guy. Mitt Romney was a pretty good guy. We just decided as a group that we liked Obama better. When George Bush ran, likewise, we thought Al Gore was a good guy. We didn't think he was an evil person. Maybe some people did, but for the majority of people, we just liked Bush better. John Kerry, nice guy. Be nice to have him as a neighbor and all that sort of thing, but we just preferred George Bush. So throughout the history of the United States, we generally went to the middle and we said, who do we like better? And we chose the one we liked better. This election, we came out of that, and they actually polled people, and both both candidates had more than a 50% disapproval rating. So the pollster that I watched to explain this basically said this is the first time in history where we said we don't like him, we don't like her. Which one do we not like the least? And that's how we chose that. And I looked for that poll election since then. I haven't been able to find that pollster data, but I would suspect, at least my observation is, I think we've had that for the past 2 elections also. So that, yeah, definitely catabolic conflict. They were tearing each other down every chance they got. They couldn't say anything nice about each other. So, anybody know what this is? These are the people that are currently in the president's cabinet right now. You know, the new president, when he took over, usually there's like a group photo. For some reason, this time all I could find looked like a yearbook photo. So I have updated this since the election. I used to have the Biden cabinet, but this is Trump's cabinet for his second term. Do you think during their cabinet meetings that they have anabolic or catabolic conflict? The answer, I can't tell you, because I've never been invited to one of their cabinet meetings. But whether you wear a Republican jersey or Democratic jersey or independent or pizza party jersey, I don't care. We should all be praying that in the room of the president, when they have these cabinet meetings, there should be anabolic conflict. They should be building each other up. We hope that they disagree and come up with smarter solutions. Because what you don't want to have happen is what happened here. Does anybody recognize this picture? Who is that? Yeah, John F. Kennedy. So this is his cabinet. So, and you can see Lyndon Johnson there in the photo on the left. So he's meeting with his cabinet. And if you were to stop most people on the street and say, hey, we're going to do Mount Rushmore again, you need to pick the top 4 presidents we've had in the United States, who would you choose? Most people would probably put this guy on the list. You know, he did a lot of good things. He wished us to the moon. He did a lot of good things to progress civil rights. But you know what? I read a lot of history books, and it's kind of amazing that we think so highly of him now, because at the time, he had a very, very low approval rating. In fact, that's why he was in Dallas the day he got shot. If you read the Secret Service books, they begged him not to go, but he was in campaign mode. All the polls said he was going to lose in a landslide the next time. And I'm not going to go into details, but if you wonder why, go look up Bay of Pigs, the Vietnam conflict. He actually started sending his people over there. So anyway, he did some things that really had people upset. And they were very mad about it, and they were going to vote him out as quick as they could. So not only did he want to go on a parade route, he wanted to do an open convertible, and the rest is history. So, but the reason why, the interesting thing is when I read the history books, they don't really blame Kennedy for all that. I guess you could blame him, but because he appointed these people, but they blame the people in this room. They were what became known as yes men. So Kennedy may say something like, I think we should go invade Cuba. And somebody in that room should have said, are you sure that's a good idea, Mr. President? Instead, they just said, yes, sir, we'll get right on it. We'll make that happen. And there was no conflict in this cabinet. They basically, yes, sir, whatever we can do for you, sir. And that's what you want, sir. That's a great idea, sir. No matter what people thought about it, that's what this room thought. They just went ahead. So the whole point I'm trying to make with these political slides is the fact that we all know and understand that catabolic conflict is really, really bad. But I can tell you that no conflict can be just as bad as catabolic conflict. We want to have good conflict. We want to be able to build each other up. Okay. If by chance your neighbor is bent over, you can tap them on the shoulders and tell them we can get up and we can continue with our sermon now. We're going to go back to the Bible stuff. The honor asks us to look at some examples in the Bible about different stories and talk about how there is both anabolic conflict and catabolic conflict. So the first one is Acts 15, 1 through 20. And all the verses are going to be up here, so we're not going to stop and actually read each one. You can write these down. And if you're not familiar with the story, you can look it up when you get home and read the full story, and if you want to answer this later for yourself. But this is the conflict over circumcision, also known as the Jerusalem Council. So how does this story illustrate catabolic conflict? What I wrote is that Christians from Judea, or Jerusalem, went to Antioch. And they basically said, you guys are new Christians. You aren't Jewish enough. You need to be more Jewish in how that is. And they were creating conflict because these new Christians they were still trying to figure this whole thing out. They were Gentiles coming to the faith. And these Jews were coming and trying to make their Christians completely Jewish as opposed to more of a Christian. So that's how it was catabolic conflict. As far as anabolic conflict, in verse 6, it says that the apostles and elders met to consider the question. And they figured out that, God knows the heart. They said, we need to focus on what's important. And the Christian faith is not necessarily completely steeped in all the Jewish traditions. And so we need to separate the traditions away from what was really important. God knows your heart was what they decided. So that's how they turned that into anabolic conflict. They got together to discuss it, and they studied that, and they thought about it, and they prayed about it. That was a good way to turn that from catabolic to anabolic. The next question, or the next reference is 1 Corinthians 12, 12 through 31. This is what I call the Mr. Potato Head. So, unity and diversity in one body. So, how does this passage illustrate catabolic conflict? This is where the foot says to the hand, because I want to be a hand. And does the ear say, no, I don't want to be an ear, I want to be an eye. And eye to the hand, he goes, I don't need you, because I can see now, and those kinds of things. Talks about how our relationships in the church. Sometimes we have you guys ever seen this in church? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but this happens all the time, and Paul talks about that. So the next part, how does this passage illustrate anabolic conflict? And I would suggest to you in verse 25, it says, Paul tells us to have equal concern for each other, rejoice together. So I remember sitting on many church board meetings where someone seems to get upset because not everyone is supporting their passion, their special thing that they go through as far as their ministry, their efforts. I guess my thought is on this, we should be supportive of each other. If you have that passion for whatever, I'm going to support you. But you have to appreciate that. Your passion for your ministry, say feeding the poor or whatever you do, may not be my passion. My passion happens to be youth. I appreciate Pathfinders. Likewise, I don't want a bunch of people to show up at Pathfinder meetings if you aren't really interested in helping serve what we do. If you're passionate about youth, by all means, more the merrier. But I need to support you, and you need to support me. But that's where this story with your church boards can be anabolic. We can have anabolic. We can build each other up. I can say, how you might, get more participation or something. I can give you ideas. I can be supportive. I can donate money for your special cause. But if I'm not supporting your cause, I better have a cause of my own. I guess I would say that. I don't need to. We all know those people that just kind of criticize everybody. But you should be fully supportive of everyone's ministry. If somebody put it in their heart to be a whatever, fill in the blank, I'm going to support that. And if we, to have somebody passionate about something is very important. God puts different passions in all of our hearts, and we should support each other. The next passage is on Genesis 13, 1 through 12. This is a story about Abram and Lot before he was Abraham. Basically, if you read through it, how does this story illustrate conflict? In verse 7, it talks about quarreling between the camps. They were too crowded. So Lot had a whole bunch of sheep. Abram had a whole bunch of sheep. They had a whole bunch of people that took care of their sheep, and there wasn't enough grass to really take care of everybody. So they were too close together, too cramped, and they were quarreling because they, just the way things happen when things get too crowded. So how did this story illustrate anabolic conflict? This is negotiation. Abram basically walked Lot up, and he goes, look to the left, look to the right. Pick your direction. You can have whichever side you want. I'll take the other, and I'll be perfectly happy with it. Hindsight, Lot picked what looked to be the greenest pastures. In hindsight, he probably wished he would have picked the other way, but that story plays out later. But the point is, anabolic conflict. Abram was the one to negotiate, and he says, let's work this out. So, and the last one we're going to talk about is James 4, 1 through 3. I'm going to ask Alexis to come up and read this for us. James 4, 1 through 3. Or I think you called her Lexi, the birthday girl, right? Is this mic on? Is this mic on? See if this mic is on. Can you read?
Yeah.
Awesome.
When do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and you do not have. You murder and convert and do not obtain. You fight in war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask amends, that you may spend it on your pleasures.
Okay, so what do these verses say about catabolic conflict?
We have bad conflict because of our selfishness.
Because of our selfish. That's a good answer. I would put that on your paper too. So, yeah, exactly. Thank you. We have bad conflict because of our selfishness. We are selfish, our selfish desires. So, this was not the first time I've preached a sermon. I've preached it many times before. And so the cool thing about doing that is that I really have to only prepare a sermon once, and I can present it several times. So I create my notes once, and I just, I don't have to study much every time I preach it. So my late wife, we had different opinions on how to keep an orderly house. I like to keep my things out where I could find them again. She liked to keep things put away where, even quite honestly, she couldn't even find them again. But I'd preached this a few times, and I was getting ready a Friday night before I was going to preach it again. And I sit down to collect my things, and I can't find my notes. And so I asked my wife, I said, I can't find my notes. Did you happen to do something with them? Perhaps. She may have. So I'm like looking, and I can't find them. I've got to start from scratch again. So I printed out a new set, and I just start taking my notes again and everything. And she walks by, and she says, oh, you weren't able to find them. And I don't yell, I don't hit, I don't scream, I don't throw those kinds of tantrums. But I started to feel my blood pressure rise a little bit. Anybody else? I'm going to not ask you to raise your hand, but I think you all have been there where, you're not going to burst. Thank you for raising your hand. You don't just throw out, just throw into a tantrum, but you can feel your blood pressure getting higher. You think, I wouldn't have to do this if you would have left my stuff where I left it. And then this screen was sitting in front of me. And so I looked at the screen. I thought, I'm going to try to practice what I'm preaching. I said, am I involved in this conflict because of my selfishness reasons? And I realized I was. My desire to have things where I could find them again was in direct conflict with her desire to have a nice, tidy house when people come to visit. And I was being selfish because I was keeping my things out when she, over her desires. So I realized it is true. And I don't always do this, but when I feel that blood pressure start to get boiled, I feel like I could really get upset. I have to remind myself, I tell myself, how am I contributing to this conflict? And have to admit, more times than not, like 99.999999, round up to 100% of the time, it is my fault. I'm at least partially, if not fully, to blame for us being in bad conflict. And us humans, we have an innate ability to forgive ourselves. We have trouble forgiving our neighbors, our friends, our wives, our brothers, our sisters, whoever, but we can always forgive ourselves. You guys notice that, or is that just me? But it's an observation. But so if you can realize that you actually are part, if not all of the problem, we can forgive ourselves much easier. So I would suggest if you can pick up that little trick, that's a good thing I try. All right. So the rest of this sermon focuses on a concept called the slippery slope. Slippery Slope is a book based on a book called The Peacemaker by Ken Sande. If you're interested in flipping through it, you're welcome to look through my copy. I enjoy reading. I've downloaded it and listened to an audiobook. Sometimes I've given the sermon, and later families will tell me that they actually bought this and used it for their devotionals until they got through it, which is really kind of cool. So this book actually talks about a concept of a slippery slope. So slippery slope, and you'll need to write this down. And if for no other reason, I would encourage you to write this down because you'll want to refer back to this list later this week or as you think about this sermon. But it splits apart our conflicts in 3 different categories. 2 of them are catabolic and 1 is anabolic. The catabolic are the escape responses, the attack responses, and peacemaking response. Attack responses and escape and attack are the catabolic, and peacemaking responses are the anabolic. So the idea is, you guys ever, of course we have snow here. You know, in the wintertime we pile up snow, and we plow the parking lots, and maybe you grew up on a beach area, but big mound of sand, whatever, and you play king of the mountain. So the object is to stay on top, right? And everyone's trying to push you down. And once you start falling down, it's tougher and tougher to get back to the top. So if you can think about a big ice dome, and you want to stay on top of that ice dome, that's where the peacemaking responses are. Because once you start falling off that top, it gets worse and worse and worse as you go down, 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 down. So it's called the slippery slope. Once you start sliding, you're going to keep going unless you can realize it and turn yourself around and try to climb back to the top. So let's write these down. Escape responses, I'll read these and spell them out for you, are suicide, flight, and denial. SUICIDE, suicide. Flight, FLIGHT, and denial, DENIAL. And we'll come back to what these mean, but let's write these down now. And the other attack responses are murder, litigation, and assault. MURDER, murder. Litigation, LITIGATION, litigation. And assault, ASSAULT, assault. Again, murder, litigation, assault. And the peacemaking responses, which is what we want to try to get to, these are ways we can solve ourselves. We can start climbing back up on the mountain. Are overlook, reconciliation, negotiation, mediation, arbitration, and accountability. So I'll spell these for you. Overlook, OVERLOOK. Reconciliation, RECONCILLIATION. Negotiation, NEGOTIATION. Mediation, MEDIATION. Arbitration, ARBITRATION. And accountability, ACCOUNTABILITY. Again, overlook, reconciliation, negotiation, mediation, arbitration, and accountability. And if you don't get these now, that's fine. Just see me afterwards and you can copy off my list here. But we're going to talk about the trends. So the trends the slippery slope have trends. So it goes from private to public. Private to public. So on the far end is suicide, which is something I do to me. That's something I would do to me. And murder, which is something I do to you. So if you see, suicide is on the far left and murder is on the far right. So again, it goes from me to you, private to public. It also goes from voluntary to forced. Voluntary to forced. So basically, flight, if you see flight in the middle there of the left, this is something you're free to go. You can do this yourself. And then litigation is something you're forced to do. You actually have to sit down and you're forced to actually negotiate this out. So again, it goes from voluntary to forced. And it also goes from defensive to antagonistic. So when you look at the slope, denial, no, to assault means I'm going after you. So there's a big difference there. It's defensive, which is something, don't touch me kind of thing, to antagonistic, where I'm actually going after you. So that's like assault. And then it's also important to notice that the extreme responses is where you have the greatest loss. Suicide, game over. And the same thing for murder, game over. Those are both permanent. That's not something you can come back from. Life is not a video game where you get to have life number 2 and reinsert the cartridge or whatever you do now with your video games. Hit reset or whatever on the game. Game over. That's final. That's it. So we don't want to go there. We definitely want to catch things before they go down that far on the slippery slope. And it's also noticed that the end focus is on me to you. Me to you. So, for example, let's just look at some of the anabolic responses. Overlook and accountability. Overlook and accountability. Again, that's something I can do, and accountability is something I'm holding you responsible for. So if you do something to offend me, I can just overlook it. That's something I can do. But if I'm going to hold you accountable for something, that's something I'm going to make sure I do to you. And then also, it's important to notice that in the middle is the focus is on us. At the very, very top of the slippery slope, we want to have the focus on us. It's something that's beneficial to both of us, if at all possible. So we have mediation and negotiation. That's something we do together. We sit down together and we talk about it. Whether it's, with an attorneys involved or just me and you sitting down, mediation and negotiation, we have somebody at the church to come help us kind of thing. So but the middle focus is on us. So that's the slippery slope trends. So this next part, to get through the honor, it asks us to think about examples of different types of, let me also say, the rest of the honor actually talks about the kid version of this. So there's actually a book by Ken Sande's wife, Corlette Sandy. If you want to look at that, it's called The Young Peacemaker. It's got a lot of good examples. If you're a school teacher or you involve kids with some way, you're welcome to look at this. Highly recommended. My late wife, she was a school teacher, and she got some good illustrations out of that. But that's a way to work this out. And the slippery slope is a little more easy. It's not quite, they don't talk about suicide or murder, but the escape or runaway, blame game, deny. The attack or flight, gossip, put downs, and the work it out or overlook, talk, and get help. So we'll talk about those. The rest of the honor, we're actually going to talk about each of these categories. And the game is try to figure out a story in the Bible where this happened. The Bible is a lot of examples for us, right? And so the cool thing is that the Bible has 3,237 people listed in the Bible. Trust me, I didn't sit down and count all those individual people identified, not by name, but at least they identified them by the person. I got this number off the internet, and I believe everything I read off the internet, as I'm sure most of you do. But anyway, the point is, I don't care what the number is. Every single person talked about in the Bible dealt with conflict. So everybody can be an example. It can be a good example, it can be a bad example, or they can show how, like we talked earlier, it can be both examples. We'll start out bad example and turn into a good example. So we're going to talk about different Bible stories that you can think of that talks about each of these categories. And again, thank you, but they're allowed to copy off my papers. But if you can think of a different story, you can write your own story down. The second part is something you cannot copy, and I can tell you cannot copy off of me, because it's give a personal example. Because I look out and I don't see me sitting out there. So all of you have your own personal example. So you need to think about a time in your life when you actually encountered these kinds of things, or somebody close to you encountered these things, and it asks to write that down. So I'll tell you my answers, but you'll have to come up with your own answer for the second part. So, and of the 3,237 people listed in the Bible, I can guarantee you that only one of them was perfect. Only one of them was perfect. And that one perfect person encountered more conflict, more bad conflict, catabolic conflict than you and I can even imagine. He literally had the weight of the world on him. It's amazing to me that there are people who go through this life thinking that they can go through this life on this sinful world and not have any conflict. That life's going to be happy all the time. Got news for you. This is not the Garden of Eden, and it's not heaven. We're stuck on this sinful earth, and you will encounter conflict. And as Jesus illustrated, the better you are, the more conflict you're probably going to encounter. So you might as well get used to figuring out how to deal with it because it comes to all of us. So the first category that we're going to talk about is the escape called denial. So escape, first of all, is more interested in avoiding something than solving something. So again, you want to just avoid the situation. You're more interested in doing that than actually figuring this out and solving it. So that's an escape. We call that escape. So the first one, denial, I think of a story in 1 Samuel 2:22. It's a story about a guy named Eli. He was the high priest. And Eli had some kids. And these kids were not doing very good things. You can read the Bible and figure out what they were doing, but everyone came to Eli the priest and they said, "Hey, Eli, your kids, they're not doing very well. They're doing actually horrible things. You need to fix this." So Eli's response, he kind of just ignored it. He denied it. He denied it was going on. If you remember the story, how'd that turn out for Eli? Was that a good or bad outcome? Very bad conflict, right. So obviously, denial is not a good thing we should be striving to deal with our problems with. So my personal example, through my various jobs, I've had employees that work for me, and I found out a long time ago that if an employee is doing something wrong, ignoring it, denying it, that employee does not generally get better on their own. You generally have to bring that employee in before things get too bad, hopefully, and you have a conversation about what they're doing or not doing that is causing problems. And so you talk about that, and if you have any hope of saving them and their job, you got to have those discussions early, and you have to address it head on. Because if you just ignore it, you deny it, if you will, things oftentimes just get worse. So that's not a good outcome. The next story is escape called the blame game. I think of a story in Genesis 3. So you may have a fancy Bible. I have a cheap Bible from the Dollar Tree, and my Bible says that God told Adam and Eve not to play football in the garden. And so he goes, "I don't want you playing football in the garden." And Adam said, and then he came down one time, and lo and behold, they were playing football. And so God told Adam, he goes, "I thought I told you not to play football." And Adam says, "Not my fault. It's this wife's fault." In fact, he turned this around and he goes, "God, it's your fault because you made this woman that got me to play football." And of course, Eve, she wanted to play the blame game too. She blamed the snake on it. She blamed the serpent. She says, "Well, this serpent made it sound so exciting. It's the serpent's fault. God, you created the serpent that caused us the problem." So this is a classic example of the blame game. God tries to hold you accountable, or someone tries to hold you accountable, and you blame somebody else for it. How'd that turn out for Adam and Eve? Bad, right? Yeah, not a good outcome. My personal example is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm an engineer. When I went to college, I wasn't most prepared, as some of my classmates were, and I had a calculus class, and I was failing at midterms, and they actually moved me into what we call drag calculus, a slower calculus to learn this. So you know why I was failing calculus? Professor's fault. Yeah, there's a bunch of us in that class that did not do well, so we had to go to this other class. So that's what I told myself for many years, and it took a while for me to realize, I probably had something to do with that, with that equation, because there were people in our class that actually did well in calculus, and they, for whatever reason, they did much better than me. They tried harder, they were smarter, or whatever it was, but it's not necessarily the calculus professor's fault. It was my fault. So that was an example where I played the blame game in the past. Escape, runaway. Can you think of a time in the Bible when people tried to run away from the problems or run away from something? So I think of a story in Jonah. By the way, this is if you go to Jerusalem on the south shore there, they have a big statue of a whale to commemorate where Jonah jumped on the ship. But so Jonah, basically God says, "Hey, Jonah, I want you to go over here. I want you to go preach. I want you to go win some souls for me." And Jonah did the opposite. He basically went the other way. He's going to run away from his issues. He's too hard to deal with. He didn't want to do it. How'd that turn out for Jonah? Not very good, huh? I'm sure it would have turned out much better if he just, marched into Nineveh like God told him to begin with. But Jonah had to make life hard, and that's how it went. My personal example, I left a job, probably my favorite job ever, because I just wanted to get away from a coworker. I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's true. And situation where, I didn't even talk, long story, but it's hate to admit it, but that's why I left, because I did not like a coworker, and I figured it's easier for me to get a new job and move on than for my coworker to get a new job. So it was good for me to leave, but it's not a good reason to leave. So my favorite job ever. Number 11, give a biblical example of attack or put down. So attack is in a different category. That's over on the far right. That's where you're more interested in winning an argument than the saving relationships. That's what, so you want to win the argument. You don't care if you ever talk to that person again. You want to make sure that you come out successful. So there's something called put downs, attacks called put downs. I think of an example in Nehemiah 4. There's a guy named Sanballat who was Nehemiah's arch enemy. They just didn't get along. And so Sanballat got a bunch of critics together, and they came and they yelled at Nehemiah, and I quote, "You feeble Jews, what are you going to do, bring those stones back to life? Look, even a fox could break that wall." Seems pretty tame by today's standards. We have social media now where we've perfected the put downs. But back in the day, apparently that was pretty offensive, and it really hurt their feelings. And a lot of the Jews wanted to stop and fight and get embroiled. And so that's the bad part. The good part is that Nehemiah basically said, you know what, let's ignore them. Let's just keep on task. They got that wall built in 52 days. And so that's actually a good example where you can ignore the put downs and just proceed with life and got the job done. So a personal example, I think of Facebook and other social medias. It seems like everyone's trying to criticize everybody, especially if you look in the comment section. You're watching a YouTube video, look at the comment sections. I'm just amazed at how many people go out of their way to say the nastiest things to people you don't even know or whatever. But that's part of life. It's, for whatever reason, it's proliferated because of our advanced technologies. So it's kind of sad. Give a biblical example of attack called gossip. I think of a story in Numbers 13. This is where the spies, Joshua sent spies to the promised land. Go spread it out. And the Bible says that they came back with a bad report. They exaggerated sizes. They basically tried to make it sound as bad as possible. Again, not a good outcome. They were stuck in the wilderness another 40 years to wander around. There's one time, so my personal example was where someone did something really, really, really bad to me. And I tried to make sure, quite in hindsight, I tried to make sure everyone knew about it. I told everyone what this person had done to me. And it took me a while to realize that just because something's true doesn't mean it's not still gossip. Shame to admit it, but again, I'm up here telling you my sins. But again, truth is still gossip, but even bad gossip is obviously bad. We all understand that. But I'm sure we hear stories about other people talking about other people. Again, you have to wonder, is it necessary for that person to understand that story? A lot of times it's not. That's a gossip. Number 13, give a biblical example of attack, a fight example. So I think of the first one, first fight that we know of. This is in Genesis 4, 3 through 8. Cain and Abel, we all know that story where they fought, and Cain killed Abel. And this story I want to talk a little bit about. God comes down and he talks to Cain. He says to Cain, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This is the first example of where God basically says, you know what? It doesn't matter what people do to you. You can't help that. That's on them. What they do to you is on them. How you react, that's on you. You can react however you want, but you can react in a positive way or a negative way. And so it's your fault if things turn out bad. So again, that's just an interesting concept that I was trying to explain to an 8-year-old a couple weeks ago. So they called you whatever they called you. That doesn't mean you have to haul off and hit them and kick their bike and do some other things. What they do to you, that's on them. But how you reacted, you just allowed them to steal your joy. People, and I talk to residents all the time. I work for a city, and they cut their grass and blew the clippings over on my yard or something like that. They're just annoying me. Well, it might be working. Why do you let them? Is that really that important kind of thing? So why are you letting them steal your joy? And it's tough to get people to see that concept. I think of my personal example, 5th grade. That's all I'm going to say about that. Number 14, give a biblical example of work it out. So again, work it out. Let's talk about this section. This section is actually commanded by God. It's empowered by the gospel. It's directed towards mutually agreeable solution. And this is where we want all of our conflict to be. This is the good conflict. These are the good advisors to the president. You want to say, are you sure about that? And challenge each other. We want to build each other up. So we're going to build each other up by working it out. So John 8, 3 through 11, work it out, overlook. So here's an example where a lady was doing something and some guys were basically, accusing her of some bad things that she'd done. And Jesus came and helped out the situation and got rid of the bad guys. But then after they left, he talked to the woman and he said something that he regularly said to people that he encountered. He said, "Your sins are forgiven. Go and sin no more." God can overlook our sins. No matter what you've done, God can take care of the situation, but he can also overlook the issues. That's not to say we shouldn't forget what happened in the past. It's always probably good to remember so we don't do it again. But you don't need to feel guilty about it, because God has forgiven you. God says, go and sin no more. So we always talk about, what would God say about whatever the sin du jour is in today's society? And I know exactly what he'd say. He'd say, don't do it again. He says, you're forgiven. Don't do it again. He didn't embrace the sin, but he did forgive the sinner. So, my personal example, raise your hand if you have kids. Kids will say and do a lot of things. And as a parent, there are some parents that fly off the handle and retaliate when their kid does whatever. But hopefully you all are good parents. And you know that good parents can overlook the things because you understand that the kid will wake up the next day and probably forget all about what happened. And you do want to train your child to be a good person, but you just have to understand that they're still growing, maturing, and that sometimes they say things they may not mean. Sometimes they do mean it. You still have to overlook it. You have to make sure that it's a learning experience and you help them grow to be a good adult. The next one we're going to talk about is something called talk, work it out talk. I think of a story in 1 Samuel 25. This is where David and he had a bunch of guys that were with him, and he was protecting another guy who was doing some work on his land. And anyway, started quarreling with the guy who owned the land. And they got, the guy's name is Nabal, and his wife, his name was Abigail. And Abigail came to him and says, look, because David was so mad at this guy, he was about ready to take his entire army and go completely obliterate not only Nabal, but all of the help. He was going to commit a lot of murders that day. And Abigail stepped in and she basically said, forgive my stupid husband. I'm sure she wasn't the first wife to say that, and I'm sure she wasn't the last, and I'm sure they'll continue till the end of time. But she says, please forgive my stupid husband. She fed them with food. She tried to make things over. She said, let's talk about it. We appreciate you helping us here, and so forth. She was able to save the day, and she prevented a lot of people from getting murdered that day. So my personal example with my late wife, I just remembered, again, sometimes you feel your blood pressure starting to rise, and she had this habit, we'd say, my love. And so I got in the habit of saying it back, my love. And so whether we were being nice or just wanted to we really had some issues we need to sit down and talk about, but you start out, my love, and it just kind of reminds you that you do love this person. Why do you want to argue with this person? You know? So that helps at least set the tone for how you talk about it. Next one, give a biblical example of work it out, getting help. I think of a story in 1 Kings 3 where these two ladies were having a dispute. You know, they had some problems and they could not decide amongst themselves. So they went to somebody who was smarter than them to settle their dispute. And Solomon did a good job at it. So personal example through my personal life and life at work. We've had opportunities where you go to mediation. There's kind of a joke that, you know, mediations are when both parties are unhappy, equally unhappy. But in the end, it is good. You work something out so that you can at least, a solution that you can at least live with. You need to go with somebody smarter who acts as the judge. And, you know, New Testament talks about, you know, using the church for that resource. You know, if you're having an issue in family or personal matters, you know, find someone who can objectively, from a third-party standpoint, look at it and give you some good advice. And try to look out for both interests. Again, trying to find a common way when it's a win-win situation. Last question is, how can you stay on top? How can you stay on top? I think of a Bible verse in Psalms 19:14. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight. You know, if we can be more Christ-like, we can solve a lot of our issues. You know, the WWJD, what would Jesus do? That really is a lot of truth in that. What would Christ do? What does Christ want me to do? How does he react? And go back over that list that you wrote down in the beginning about all the anabolic responses versus the catabolic responses. Where are you on that chart? And how can you turn that situation around to get back on top? So the last thing we're going to do is something you're going to do on your own with a buddy, with a friend, with a spouse, with a brother, with a sister, with a stranger off the street. I don't care. But you need to reverse role play something that's happened in your life. Think about something in your life where you've had something bad happen, a catabolic conflict. Talk to your friend and kind of role play. You know, take turns being you, if you will. How would you respond? You know, describe the situation, and how would you respond in this situation? How could you have responded differently to turn it into an anabolic conflict? You know, the whole idea of today's discussion is that conflict happens to all of us, happens to us all the time. And I'm amazed at how often people let conflict, just any kind of conflict, completely ruin their whole day. You know, somebody got their coffee order at Starbucks wrong. Somebody, you know, the guy ahead of you is not turning, doesn't have their foot on the gas as soon as the light turns green, you know. That can ruin some people's whole day. How sad. You know, how can you ignore those kinds of things, but how can you turn those kinds of conflicts into positive conflicts? You know, and then those things I listed are very simple things, but if you can't handle those simple things, you know, you've got more difficult things. So what do you do when your spouse and you disagree? What do you do when your friends disagree and a coworker's issues come up? And you all have your own examples. That happens every day to all of us. You have to think about it. How am I responding? And where am I at on this slippery slope? Am I starting to slide down the sides? If you do, you need to figure out, stop. And go back and look at your list at the anabolic responses, the peacekeeping responses. How can I turn this, how can I use one of these tools to get myself back up on top of the mountain? So, I know this wasn't a typical sermon, but it's not typical the way I teach in honor, but hopefully it's enjoyable and you got a blessing out of it as much as you would for a normal sermon. I appreciate your attention, and like I said, if you want a copy, if you missed something in the notes, you're welcome to copy off of me. But I pray that you did gain a blessing out of this sermon.